Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to week 2 of the Champion Draft Series. I'm Jason Sational, your host. And this week we were taking on Spids and the redeemed qualities. If you missed out on the series, there will be a playlist down below in the description. So make sure to follow from the first intro video if you want a little bit more background. But this week, let's talk a little bit about Spids' draft and go through some expectations, thoughts, and then we can cover the games as well. But first, let's cover the draft. We have Gwen, Leona, Draven, Neela, Kennen, Lucian, Sejuani, Kaisa, Gangplank, and Poro King. So a little bit of a mix. If we go into what we see Spids played in week 1 to kind of temper some expectations, she brought Draven Gwen, which is just a red Gwen list, very, very reminiscent of when this deck was played. We have Kennen Lucian, which is her variant of champion strength, so just having the classic Banal City or Banal City Demacia with champion strength. There are a few kind of funny cards like Skip and things like that, but overall fairly standard. And then Gangplank Sejuani, which is as most people would know as the Plunder deck. So little bit of like this sort of combo-y aggressive style of game plan. And I think that looking at her champions, going back to the rosters, she has a lot of this sort of aggressive mid-range style of stuff. We have Leona, the Gwen, the Neela, the Sejuani, the Kaisa, the Poro King, Gangplank, right? I think just off the bat, the Sejuani Gangplank deck looked like one of the most strongest and consistent contenders that she would bring. So I think that's definitely something that is likely to be expected coming into my match. And it turned out that she did bring it. The other decks are a little bit interesting. Now, because I like to center my compositions around the Yasuo Katarina stuff, which is generally pretty good into mid-range, I'm not as worried about things like, like some sort of like Daybreak mid-range, even like the Kaisa, whatever, right? If she decide to go for like some Kaisa Lucian, just Demacia, Shrima mid-range kind of style of deck, these things aren't really things that I'm super worried about. And so the things that I were more worried about was this sort of aggressive style of deck. And I think something that I was afraid of, just looking at her old lineup, if she brought champion strength with like this and like Poro King or something like that, I felt very uncomfortable bringing something like Janna Karma or some like Lee Sin or Triple Ionia, right? Things that I presume to be pretty decent into the Plunder deck, Gangplank Sejuani, but I could really struggle if there was some like champion strength Yordle arms, or sorry, champion strength Poro King kind of lineup, right? Like that was the thing that I was really, really scared of. The red Gwen is still kind of spooky into like Ionia stuff outside of like the Yasuo deck. So it was a little bit up in the air. I ended up bringing a close run back of last week's lineup. Let's just talk about what she brought first. She ended up bringing Lucian, Gwen, Gangplank, Sejuani, and Kaisa Kennen, being the Plunder deck. Lucian Gwen instead of Red Gwen variants. She has the Demacia variant. If you remember, like Gwen Quinn or Gwen Vayne, just very similar builds of that. We have Plunder and then Kaisa Kennen. Yeah. Aha, cool. Fairly standard. And this was actually a Valley of Invitation Folk deck, which I didn't expect. It's cool. Or if you like just think about champions, it's really easy to get misleading when they're mostly there as like some region fillers. Ice giving access to Shrima means you got to play Valley of Invitation Folk, right? In which if I brought, Triple Ionia or something like that, whew, this would definitely be a really, really spooky deck. I did end up banning this deck, just because I also brought another similar deck that I think would horribly into it. Being, I ran it back pretty much. I had the Janna Nocturne, your Galio, Katarina Yasuo. A few small changes. I between week by week, you'll see me make small changes throughout some lists. Especially when there's a few flex slots. I'm expecting more aggressive slanting decks. So in this version, I have 2 copies of Tasty Feyfolk and 2 copies of Rejuvenating Breeze. So just having some extra heal. And there's also 3 House Spiders, so definitely a lot more early game focus. Having a 2-for-1 block is fantastic. The Udyr Galliolus, I think, was just a standard run back. And the Janna Nocturne list, I'm thinking Gwen and the sort of like Shadow Isle stuff, or her kind of Shadow Isle stuff, as well as the Plunder stuff. Historically, like if you run like Ruination Vengeance into like the Plunder stuff, generally that does pretty well. Now, unfortunately, I'm running some pretty bad cards overall, having to like play not only Nocturne. This isn't like playing Jace Heimer, where you have a lot of value and through Heimer turrets, as well as like the pressure through Jace. It's not like Nasus, where you just have a really, really big meatball that all of a sudden makes it very difficult for their champions to attack. It's lacking a lot of like the tools that historically do well into Plunder, and Plunder also got this card, Spirits Unleashed, which is really, really bad in Shadow Isle's control. So in hindsight, this spring is a little bit suspect. It did end up working out this week, but I guess I kind of already spoiled it, but it did end up working out this week. But that was a lineup. In hindsight, I think that this deck sucks. It's not like bad, but the power level of having to play the cards that I'm playing are generally speaking pretty bad. Nocturne overall is a lot less useful than I had anticipated, and the Sentinels are just kind of so-so. In the future, there's probably going to be a lot less of this deck, and I think that there also are going to be fewer aggressively slanting lineups. There's a lot more slower stuff. So obviously into like slower things, this deck also just loses a lot of value in the removal, not being able to, or either not having any targets to hit, or just the deck overall kind of slumping down. So there's definitely better uses for Jan in the future. But in this lineup, I did end up banning the Kaisa Kennen Curious Shellfolk because it's the worst matchup for my Janna Nocturne. I need to expect that the Janna Nocturne is not banned, which wasn't. So I need to figure out what the best 2 decks to face into my Janna Nocturne are. It's kind of another interesting way to think about picks and bans. When you are playing 2 decks into your opponent's 2 decks, you need to figure out what your weakest deck is and what the best matchup is for your opponent, or into your opponent, so you have the highest chance of getting it through. And in this case, Janna Nocturne was my weakest deck that I was expecting it to not get banned, and I think that the Kaisa Kennen Shellfolk deck was its hardest matchup. I just banned it. But that is the gist of things. I will leave you guys with the games, and I will catch you guys in next week's recap. I'll see you guys later. And there should be a lot more fun decks that I'm preparing, so that should be a little bit of mix up as well. But thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, jumping into the first game, Janna Nocturne into the SESGP Plunder. Now, this matchup is pretty dependent on a couple things. The first one being them able to draw their Siren Song, or not Siren Song, but Spirits Unleashed. Because once they draw Spirits Unleashed, all of a sudden, you know, the one drop like their Shell Shocker becomes a 3/2, and then all of a sudden our removal becomes a lot less valuable, right? Things like Vile Feast now can't kill originally 1 health units, even like the Spiraling, right? So removal drops down a lot of value if they are able to find the Spirits Unleashed. Otherwise, it's pretty much just trying to go removal for removal, you know. what I originally envisioned the Sentinels doing is just acting as a way to trade down board, right? Yeah, they're Fearless or Nocturne, cool. But here being a 5/4, for example, can potentially trade into 2 units and maybe push 5 on the same time, right? So utilizing the removal to thin down board while buffing the Sentinels and trying to push damage, maybe level Nocturne. Woohoo. But otherwise, the game plan is pretty straightforward. Obvious things to keep in mind when you're maintaining a board of blockers are against things like the sort of removal or things that deal damage, right? Things like the Make Rain, things like the Spirits Unleashed, things like Parlay, whatever it might be. So I mean, there's even like reason to attack in with the 1/1. If I had another Vile Feast, there might be a pretty good cause for it. Here's the thing that we didn't want to see. It's not only does it buff his units, but now again it makes my board very susceptible to things like the Make Rain, right? Like Make Rain Parlay, especially in a region combination with 0 protection tools. It just really opens us up to be vulnerable to that sort of things, which is really tough. So, truth be told, this matchup probably isn't fantastic. If they do not draw any of their Spirits Unleashed, it'd probably be a pretty fine position. Here, I think, is a little bit awkward. For 3 mana, they probably don't have the best development, so removing that is probably the best use of my mana, because now I'm just sitting sort of empty. I think I should have just ripped the True Shot Barrage there and just taken the chance that if they develop, well, you know, that's fine. But at least if they don't develop, you know, we're pretty happy about that. Now we're in a little bit awkward spot where if they play a champion, well, next turn we're stuck with a Vengeance, right? Next turn we're pretty put in a spot where we need a Vengeance GP maybe. This also kind of sucks. What's funny is the keg being a 1/2 as well, because the Spirits Unleashed just adds to a lot of the awkwardness of this situation. So in this spot, it already feels like we're kind of behind, just because once we get to these couple of turns, the sort of things that come out of the Plunder deck are either big units, the Gangplank, Sejuani, or they're able to just swarm board with a lot of buffed units that pretty much can only be answered by Ruination, which again makes things kind of awkward. So we're trying our best here. Things like the hard part is with Shadow Houses, our entire turn is the Vengeance, right? If we spend 6 mana on the Vengeance, that's pretty much it. Which is tough because it means that we'll never get ahead of them, right? If we're spending 6 mana for their 5, and we just fall behind, right? Because their units are cheaper and they are ahead of the curve, so to speak. From my perspective, it's a little bit tricky. I have some not very easily played cards, obviously being 2 of the Sunken Temples. Definitely not what I wanted to see there. And the removal not really lining up. I do end up taking the Janna. Interesting. I think I just want to shuffle through my deck, because I realized that if they just drop champion, I'm not going to have any removal for it. Things like the Mystic Shot have really fallen off a cliff at this point in the game. And I think there's really not too much we can do here. It's just a little sort of at the mercy of my opponent's draws at this point in time. Just hoping that they don't have any extra card draw. They potentially develop into removal. But there's another Spirits Unleashed, which actually is okay, because I don't have any removal, and if they don't have any card draw, which is sort of the only out at this option, I can maybe outvalue them. End up going for a True Shot, or do I go for Nocturne? I go for Janna. Whoa, what the heck? Interesting. Hmm. Would I have gone for that? I should have attacked with 2-1 at least. Would I have gone for that? Interesting. I guess I'm really afraid of just like Sejuani coming down, right? I'm just desperately trying to draw through my deck to find vengeance. I wonder in hindsight if that was necessarily correct. We could have killed Tentacle and the Omen Hawk, but we would have been in a spot where we're in the same position. And it's really tough. At this point, we're just trying not to die, right? You see how quickly we fall behind on board here. It just becomes so fast that it's really hard to keep up. And I think I realized that I would die here if I just didn't develop, because they could drag the Janna. They don't have to drag Janna with Sejuani, right? In this position, well, first of all, the tentacle kills Janna, but in this scenario, if they didn't have the tentacle and they only had the Omen Hawk, they don't even need to kill Janna to represent lethal, right? But obviously they need to be cognizant of ruination, vengeance, just hard removal. So they can't just open attack or like attack too willy-nilly and like give me time, right? Just kind of awkward. I definitely needed a ruination at some point. But even then, if they just had any sort of development, like if I imagine I ruinated before they developed the 5-4, and then they had another unit, I'm just straight up dead, right? So it's still really tough. No answer for the Sejuani yet. Just sort of rationing out my resources. The Withering Mist lined up fine, but if I don't Soul Harvest now, there's not going to be any more Soul Harvestable target. Attack comes through. I found this positioning strange because she purposely didn't get the Sejuani proc before trading it in. Or before like attacking with her other units, right? Because obviously in this sort of position, you put the position Sejuani first, that the overall damage goes through, procs the frostbite, and your units take no damage, right? So it seemed particularly strange to me, just this ordering, but I think from her perspective, and she actually, Spids made a video, has her own channel and made a video on this game and things like that, so I would recommend checking those out. But I think she said that she wanted the tentacle to die because she has another Eye of Nakaboros, which makes sense, but at least the Shell Shocker lives if you position it differently, so a little bit strange. But nonetheless, I think I specifically don't play the Sentinel because I want one extra card from the Temple, right? I could have a 3/3 here, but the 3/3 is not going to do me that much. And I'd rather have one extra draw off of the Sunken Temple in hopes that I can draw a Vengeance. At this point, well, because they have a unit, I need a blocker. And there's the Eye of Nakaboros. She could have kept the Shell Shocker. That's a little bit curious as to why she sacked that, but as you can see, when they play 1 mana 4/4s, you know, Shadow Isles removal just has a really tough time keeping up. And at this point, we are dead to everything. We'd have to draw double Vengeance if they open attack. They obviously can't develop into Ruination, but we would have to have double Vengeance and Vengeance of 4/4. So really tough. Yeah, this matchup definitely a lot worse than probably initially expected. And that's just, it comes down to a few things. The first one just being, or the biggest thing is because the Eternal season hasn't started, or at least the Eternal ranked season hasn't started yet, right? It's coming up in, I believe, this week, or is it next week? But because the Eternal Ladder isn't open, it becomes quite hard to test these decks. and it's really just down to mix of norms play or theory at this point. This matchup's quite interesting. I kept 2 soul harvests because, well, now I have 3 soul harvests because it's pretty much the best removal into pretty much the entirety of their deck, right? Barring their ability to play form up. But they only have 2 form ups, right? And if I like soul harvest on my turn, then I can sort of get out the form ups without them being able to use it offensively. This is actually kind of awkward. I don't have any fast feed removal to clear this Quietus, which Omega sucks.
Well, I did say I wanted to see the world.
They play Opulent Foyer, which is historically, I think, one of the better cards into the slower kind of control decks, simply because you get an infinitely stacking hollow. The obvious downside is it takes 2 board spaces. I offer the trade. Thing is, if I trade here and then, you know, they play Gwen when they have no mana for form up and I soul harvest it, all of a sudden they don't really have an attack, right? So I'm kind of sitting pretty here. Quietus is actually kind of funny. The change to Quietus allows me to kill a 3/1, which is something that old Quietus couldn't do. The left and all kind of sucked. There wasn't really a good one. Nice Quietus. On to the Ghastly Band? No, that's the 2/1. That's the Redeemed Prodigy. Aha. Check out my knowledge. But the cool thing here is there's something to talk about with this block. So Spids offers the full attack. I believe she ends up not doing it specifically like this, which is a little bit bizarre. She offers me the value trade, right? And in this position where I have so much removal, the only thing that matters, and their deck has none, right? Because their deck has no removal, and I can squeak out the value trade, I want to take it, right? Because when you're playing against this hollowed archetype, they're going to have, generally speaking, one very, very high attack unit attacking. And so, and then the rest of the board is kind of mediocre, right? So I want to maintain as many blockers as I can because I know that their worth is very, very high, right? They're going to be blocking, you know, 6, 7, 8 damage for every sort of blocker that I have. I think this is starting to ring off bells, right? Spids just decided to open attack with a 4-card hand, and this obviously just starts sounding off bells, right, about what their hand is. And the obvious one is it's likely not any units. Things like Rally, things like Cataclysm, things like Form Up. Or it's like a Gwen, but they don't have Form Up to protect it from Soul Harvest, and they're waiting to draw Form Up, right? So both options are likely, which means that we want to play as defensively as we can afford to. The funny thing is third a foyer, which is really, really bad. Generally speaking, you never want to draw more than 1 copy of this card because value 1, it falls off because of how Hollowed works, right? Because Hollowed only buffs 1 unit, there's really a limit on how high you want it, unless you have Gwen. Because I can just block the unit that's getting buffed by Hollowed, right? So you can see here how desperate it kind of gets with the Cataclysm and the Form Up. It's a little bit strange, but at this point I think it's completely over. It's been over for a while, I would say, when they didn't play Gwen on 4. But because I have 2 blockers, that's 2 attacks, right, that I can survive. Because again, all of the power is condensed onto the 1 unit being buffed by the Hollowed, right? And now that I have Vengeance, I am no longer worried about something like Gwen into form up into Cataclysm or into Rally slash Cataclysm, right? It's specifically these sort of three. Wait, this was kind of spooky, was it? Was this spooky? Hang on. Oh, I mean, here is it's just a little awkward because my hand is nothing, right? The specific 3-card hand that I'm worried about is Gwen into form up, which beats Soul Harvest into a rally. That's like the kind of worst case scenario. But even then, I'm simply just not dying because Gwen 1 only does 2 damage, and the next one I just Soul Harvest, right? So at that point, it's fine tapping out. But here, I just never want to tap below 6 ever again, right? Just so I can have Vengeance, so I'm not weak into some sort of Gwen rally line, right? I think last one is actually fine because they have how they changed Foyer, right? You only get the Ghastly Bands once a turn, so you can't get it. I'm pretty sure. Wait, how does it work? Like if you rally when you don't have token, do you get it, or is it only at the start of your turn if you have the attack turn? Let me hang on. I can. The cool thing about host commentary is I actually get to essentially not make myself look like an idiot. When I'm summoned, round start if you have attack time. So even if you rally, it doesn't work. Ah. So even if it is something like Gwen, form up, rally, it's limited to 2 damage unless you can rally twice or have a level Gwen. So there's really nothing I was afraid of ever after an open attack on her attack turn when Ghastly Bands or the Foyers already go off. But hey. So that was pretty one matchup for quite a long time, I would say. So definitely a lot better than the Plunder matchup. I think that deck, or specifically that version of deck, really struggles. This is something that Spids called out too from her perspective, but if you just brought Red Gwen, I think Shadow Isles would struggle a lot more into that. But it's because she brought specifically the more sort of Demacia combo oriented stuff. If you don't stick a board, it becomes a lot. You just can't win, right? Whereas if you're playing the Red Gwen version, one, your boards are a lot stickier, and two, you have harrowing, right? I suppose, you know, the Lucian version could play harrowing as well, but I wonder. This matchup is sort of the reason, or any sort of aggressive style decks, you see the tasty Fey Folk tech slotted in. House Spider, obviously, fucking house. Look at that, 2 bodies for 1. It's game over. 3 flocks was kind of awkward. I was like kind of kicking myself for it. I would rather have maybe like a House Spider, or I'm not House Spider, but a Sentry or some other unit I could play. But nonetheless, this is the hand we are dealt. I do have a Twin Discipline to pair with Tasty Fey Folk, which is really nice. If I can double dip on the healing, that just keeps me so nice and topped up that it should be really difficult to combo through the plethora of stuns and recalls and whatnot. It gets really difficult to like rally against, right? If you're trying to rally against stuns, you're gonna have a bad time. Now, her deck only plays 2 Quietus, and even though the Quietus, you know, remove some of the early game units, I'm actually quite happy to see them come out because there is now no real way for her to deal with Katarina, which means that once I draw Katarina, it's guaranteed a level. Actually, well, she has Glimpse, but this is a little bit of a... No, I end up blocking the Lucian, right? Because I'm not stupid. Okay. I was gonna say it was a bit of a gamble if I blocked the Gwen because of form up. See the Glimpse Beyond to deny me the healing, which is really, really strong. Now, it means I don't have to be worried about the Lucian level up, which just gives 3 rallies, which is nice. A lot comes down, and now at least the 3 flocks start to get some mileage, right? If Gwen is stunned or injured, she can realistically never play Cataclysm or Rally. If she wants to rally, she loses a lot of value if Gwen is not on the board. There's a form up. Not sure why I flock this turn when I can flock next turn. Maybe it's because I wanted to stun another different unit. That didn't really make any sense. But nonetheless. Pretty straightforward. Yasuo. And what's obviously nice about double drawing Yasuo is you get another free stun. I've been playing a lot of Path of Champions recently, and in Path of Champions, after a certain level, your Steel Tempest draws you a card. How cool would that be if Steel Tempest just draws a card? But nonetheless, I leave Gwen. So the reason why I don't kill Gwen now is because Gwen is injured. I can flock her when Spiz is attacking, right? So if I killed Gwen, she could play a new Gwen, and if I don't have a stun ready for that or anything like that, I can't get rid of it, right? Especially if you flock Gwen like this, you remove the skill so you don't take 2 damage, right? If this was something like, say, Boom Crew Rookie, for example, that dealt 2 damage, irregardless of whether or not it's on the board, then there could be a different argument for it. But because Gwen ability fizzles, I would rather kill it during the attack so that Spitz doesn't get an opportunity to play a second non-damage version that doesn't get flocked. And opens myself up to potentially taking extra damage, right? Now, I did have the second Steel Tempest here, which I could have actually used, but Steel Tempest is a lot more valuable, right? It can stop Cataclysm, whereas, say, I kill Gwen here, and then they replay Gwen, and I had used Steel Tempest, right? I open myself into Cataclysm, which is bad. But you can see here that as, you know, as they just get a really tough time sticking a board through the removal, they just lose the ability to do or capitalize on the rallies, right? And there's the Katarina, which is the perfect top deck, actually. At this point, any card draw or Katarina would be very, very good, just because it ends the game, right? If the game drags on a little bit, you know, I'm drawing kind of duds. Obviously, if we go like, you know, 5 more turns, I'm probably winning. But there's the odd chance that if I don't end the game in the next couple of turns before there's some weird, like, crazy combo that comes out, there's some chance I lose just because I'm at 6 HP. But Katarina kind of seals the deal on it because, one, Spids has used both Quietuses, which means that she no longer has any sort of options of dealing with Katarina, which means she gets level, right? Level Katarina obviously rallies, applies pressure, but also activates Hillock and gives me another stun if my opponent is developing into attack turns, right? Which is very, very valuable. Because right now I only have Steel Tempest. The Unworthy Soul works as well, but it just gives me more option. Blades Edge here to set up for a flock, just in case. And 3 also dies to Blades Edge from Katarina again, as well as a stun from Yasuo. So assuming this goes through, she takes 6. I can replay Katarina, get the stun, which deals 2, and then the Blades Edge deals 1, which kills Gwen. Quick mass. But it also sets it up in case I need to flock it, which I don't know why I would need to. In case there's like a third Gwen and she like threads the needle, or if she like glimpse blocks, I can flock it to deny the glimpse. This is important. So you can see what sort of positions this like Gwen Demacia deck gets put in when it just doesn't it's quite fragile, I would say. A lot more fragile than the any sort of Noxious variant. Cutting the levels.
Everything.
And the cool part is I don't need to play Katarina this turn if I want to, right? Because we're in a position where Spids cannot open attack. When I say cannot open attack, I mean they don't get anything out of open attacking, right? I just block, and then I take 2 damage, and then, well, that's her attack turn, right? She'd have to rally or Cataclysm, do something else. And it just opens her up to just losing overall. So I could be patient, right? The Katarina is basically a steel, or is basically a concussive bomb on steroids that rallies. So it's very, very important to sort of think about it like that. And here comes the 3rd flock, which punishes, right? I don't even need to stop the glimpse. But at this point, I feel so confident about my position that I'm pretty happy just to use the flock. And notice I don't play Katarina here because I want Spids to be in a position where she needs to develop into her attacks, right? That's when my deck is the strongest because I can capitalize on the stuns that I get. And when her deck is the weakest because she needs to play into, she needs to develop first, right? I mean, now it's just there's nothing that can happen. I just slam it. You know, I don't get any hillock value. It doesn't really matter. I have two unworthy souls and a stun. I don't think this does anything. Crumble. You need a crumble unit. Ayo. And that's the match.